Yo guys, welcome back. My name is Nathan and today I'm going to be talking about the 5 biggest winners and 5 biggest losers of the 2022 NHL draft. Now with how wide open this draft class was, there was going to be some winners and some losers, but throughout this entire draft there was some pretty big differences. But across the entire NHL, who were the biggest winners and who were the biggest losers and who came away with the best and worst picks? Watch till the end for all my thoughts and all the draft analysis, and make sure to hit that subscribe button if you are new. 50% of you guys are not subscribed, so if you like draft content, this channel is the place to be. Now here's the thing, especially with this NHL draft, I feel like the losers from this draft are a lot less of losers compared to last year's losers, for instance, in the 2021 draft. Even though the losers on this list I still think lost the draft, each one of these teams I think still made solid picks as well in the draft by itself. So even though I see there being losers and winners, this draft was pretty wide open and pretty close for every NHL team, and there were a ton of teams that were so close to being a winner and being in the top 5. But let's start out at number 5 and the 5th biggest winner of the 2022 NHL draft and work our way down. To me, this is a pretty surprising one, and this is easily the winner that had the least to work with in this NHL draft, and that is the New York Islanders. Now, to me, the Islanders have had really solid past couple of drafts. This one, though, takes the cake. You got Calle Odelius at 65th overall, 22nd on my board, and in my opinion, one of the more refined defensemen of this draft, bringing along some good skating skill as well. To me, he should have been a first round pick, but at the very least should have been a guy that was drafted inside that early second round range, but he goes right at the end of the second at 65, and to me that is one of the steals of the draft. You also got Quinn Finley, who I think is a decent one, has some upside, has some rawness to him, but also at 78 is a pretty good range for him, and at 98, another big steal for the Islanders defensively, and Isaiah George, who I ranked in the top 45, and to me alongside Odelius is one of the better defensemen of this class. Brings great physical edges and can push players off of pucks so easily. This is a guy that, although he's not huge, he's 6'1", I still think uses his skating, uses his physicality in such great ways, and to me he's one of the best defensemen of this draft too. You combine that with Odelius and it's pretty solid. You also got another pretty high upside guy in Matt Maggio, who's an overager, 86 points in 66 games, and Dalen Kuffler at number 174, who was playing in the WHL this last year as well. But to me, those top 3 picks are the most solid, but especially Odelius and George, 2 humongous picks and 2 big adds to that defense. And in my opinion, that type of youth and that type of skill being brought on will really help the Islanders quite a lot. And again, considering they didn't have a first round pick and their first pick in the draft was the last pick in the second, I think the Islanders did amazingly and were one of the winners of this draft class. Now moving on to the 5th biggest loser of the 2022 NHL draft, and this is a good example of a team that I don't think is a massive loser, but just slightly. I didn't really agree with the picks that they made, and that is the Edmonton Oilers. Now, they aren't helped by the fact that they only had 3 picks in this draft. Not exactly amazing for them, but I feel like there was some potential that was missed. At number 32, I think Reed Schaefer is going to be a perfectly fine third-line checking scoring winger, and for the Oilers, if they're going for high-floor guys, Schaefer is not a bad bet whatsoever and was very solid in the WHL for the Thunderbirds in these last playoffs. But to me, I had a lot of players above him just in terms of the potential. To me, there was a lot more they could have gone for, and considering they went for a guy like Bourgault in the last draft, there was a chance that the Oilers could have gone for another high-ceiling guy. But Reed Schaefer will still be solid, and I don't blame them for making the pick, but I still think there was better players available. Also in the 5th round, they got Samuel Janssen, a goaltender, which we'll see how that pans out, and in the 6th round, they got Nikita Nyazev, who I haven't seen too much, but is playing the VHL this year. But just considering the picks that they had and some players available, even as soon as the 5th round, to me, the Oilers had more potential, but again, considering they only had 3 picks, they're one of the lightest losers on this list. But now let's go on to the 4th biggest winner of the entry draft, and a team that in my opinion could have been number 1, and although they're still one of the biggest winners, there was just a little bit of missed potential. At the same time though, they still made some slam dunk picks and some very solid ones too. At number 4 and the 4th biggest winner, I have the Montreal Canadiens. Now, even though I might not agree with some picks, even though I think there could have been some more players available that they might have had more potential with, at the same time, in terms of the raw results and looking on it, there is some fantastic fantastic talent the Habs got. Obviously, Slafkovsky leading the way at the first overall spot is my third-ranked player, but I don't think there's a huge difference between him, Cooley, and Wright. So getting him at number 1, even though I think he doesn't reach, he'll be really interesting in that Habs system, and again, brings physicality and a possession game that they don't have a lot of in that system. You also got Filip Mesar, another Slovakian stud, at number 26. To me, when it comes to Mesar, he's a lot different than Slafkovsky. He's a lot more of a finesse player, a lot more of a immature guy, a lot more of a, not an immature guy, a lot more immature on the ice. He gets out-bodied quite a bit, but at the same time, he loves to pass into high-danger areas. He loves to create high-danger chances. And to me, there's a pretty interesting high-ceiling offensive player there. As for the second round, that's where it gets also pretty interesting, where they selected Owen Beck 33rd. Surprising to me that we didn't see the Habs take Jack Hughes to this spot. Pretty big surprise for me. I think we all pretty much expected that to be the case, but Owen Beck is pretty similar in the stature, and I actually prefer Owen Beck over Jack Hughes in some ways. But when it comes to Owen Beck this last year in the OHL, 51 points in 68 games. To me, when it comes to Mississauga and his play this last year, just a super smart, consistent, steady centerman. He's going to be a good third-line center that wins faceoffs, that is strong in the defensive zone, and transitions well. Nothing amazing about him, but also not many holes. And at 33rd overall, it's a pretty solid pick to make. Then going on to maybe my favorite pick of the Canadiens' whole draft at number 62 with Lane Hutson. Absolute sky-high potential here. I ranked him on my top 35. Getting him at number 62 is a fantastic pick. Although he is on the shorter side at 5'8", this is a guy that can control play so well, be able to control the pace and control the transition exceedingly efficiently. And this is a guy that can pass amazingly, can corral pucks around the perimeter great. At the same time, there is, again, the physical issues, and there is going to be some massive development that needs to come, but at the same time, the potential can be so good, and if he does reach his potential, he could be, in my opinion, a top pair D-man if everything goes right. Then going on to round 3, the Montreal Canadiens ended up taking Austrian forward Vincent Rower. Now, to me, I actually like this pick quite a bit at 75, around the range of where I would have had him. He played with the Ottawa 67s this last year, 48 points in 64 games. He's another player kind of like Mesar, where he's a lot lighter on his feet, needs to be a lot bulkier before he gets to the NHL level, but I like the craftiness with this player, a lot of deception in the way he plays, especially with his playmaking, and this is a guy that skates well, passes well, and in my opinion has a pretty underrated shot that we could see unlock with the Habs for quite a while. And number 92, Adam Engstrom is an interesting one. He's a guy that also needs a lot of development, but I think in the third round is a pretty good range for him. And then you go on to the other picks. You got Cedric Gondon from the Owen Sound Attack. 59 points in 68 games, pretty high score, and I think that scoring touch is going to translate to the NHL level, but there is some concerns over the overall game. If that gets rounded out, though, I think a 4th round pick is pretty worthy of that selection. Then in the 5th round, you got Jordan Davidson, I believe an overager for the Seattle Thunderbirds, 20 years old. Was a big part of that Seattle team that really went on and made a big storm in the WHL playoffs and, of course, in the Memorial Cup. I think he could be something, but again, he's probably going to go to the AHL next year, potentially. If he does, we'll see what he's really made of. Then in the 6th round, they go for a goaltender, Emmett Croteau of the USHL. We'll see what happens there. And then for the last pick in the 7th round, they got Petteri Nurmi, who's been playing quite a bit in the Liga this year and could be something if he gets even more development and more playing time next season. So overall for the Habs, they get a wealth of other options in pretty much every single position. Some older guys, some younger guys, some more skills, some more physical, and to me, there's a great mix of almost everything here. Now, there were some picks that weren't my favorite. I think you maybe could have gone for somebody better than Mesar, number 26, but at the same time, he's still going to be a great player, and at that range, I don't complain about it too much. Overall for the Habs, great for a draft for them, and to me, they're one of the biggest winners of this draft as well. Now, moving on to the 4th biggest loser of this 2022 draft, and another team that's kind of along the same lines as the Oilers. Next up, I have the St. Louis Blues. Now, to me, I think their draft can be just encompassed by one word, and that is just meh. Like, to me, there was a lot of picks that were fine, but didn't really push the needle too much. At 23, of course, they end up getting Jimmy Snuggerud, who I think is a reach of that spot, but does make sense around that range. When it comes to Snuggerud, he has a great defensive game. I think he's going to be a solid two-way third-line forward at the NHL level, but again, isn't going to be as high of a potential as some other picks around that range. Though in this 3rd round, I think there were a couple of interesting picks there. Alex Sanitari-Kaskamaki is going to be a really interesting project. I thought played pretty well for Finland in the U18s, I believe, this last year, and he's a player that if he gets more time, if he maybe steps up in the league next year, we could see that value start to skyrocket. Number 88 is is Michael Butchinger, which I think is an interesting one with Guelph this last year, 44 points in 63 games. That's an interesting one for me. I think there is some translatable skill, but I think a lot of work needs to be made in his just fundamental offensive skill. And even though I do think he could be an NHL player, I'm just not sure how far he gets up the lineup. Then in the other picks, you got Arseny Koraslam, who at Koramslav. I haven't really had a chance to say that name out loud before. Who played in the NHL this year as a D-man. Pretty raw from what I've seen, but we'll see how he ends up developing. Then in round 5, you got Marc-Andre Godet, and in round 6, you got Landon Sim from the London Knights. Overall for the Blues, I think there was some missed potential, and even though I think these picks will be fine for the moment, at the same time, there was a lot of prospects they could have taken. I mean, number 23, you still had great options like Brad Lambert on the board, in my opinion, and around that range, I think the Blues could have done more, but for what they want, it does make sense. Next up, though, moving to the third biggest winner of the 2022 NHL draft, let's go on to a team that, in my opinion, just had a wonderful few selections. Next up, I have the Buffalo Sabres. Now, to me, with the Buffalo Sabres, they're one of the more interesting drafts because just like the Habs, they had a lot of potential, and just like the Habs, I think they struck with some pretty big ones. Now, in the first round, they got Savoie, Ostlund, and Cooley, 3 centermen, and I'm not really sure how that really fits in the future, but I get the feeling that they were going on best player available, and at those spots, I completely agree. Savoie was one of the best players available at number 16, in my opinion. Ostlund was one of the best players available, and Cooley was a very solid two-way, is going to be a very solid two-way force, and at number 28, I like that pick as well. In the second round, I didn't love the Lindenen pick. I think he might have been the best goalie of the draft, but also in the second round, it's really rich for me. At the same time, though, in the third round, you got Victor Nuchev, who I think has quite a bit of potential. That shot is booming, and there's a lot of potential with his release and overall creativity in the offensive zone. In the fourth round, you also got Mads Lindgren, who, although defensively needs some serious work, he's pretty solid when he gets in the offensive zone and is able to create with the puck and keep possession on his team. And to me, at number 106, that's a solid pick to make. At the fifth round, you got Komarov. In the sixth round, you got Richard and Carlson. And the seventh round, you got a couple of solid Swedes, especially Linus Jolgen, who I think at the 211 spot could be a really solid pick. Overall, for the Sabres, they fill some needs, but they also go, for the most part, it looks like best player available. And especially with those first round picks, man, I think the Sabres got off really well with this draft. Next up, going to the third biggest loser of this 2022 draft. And again, I need to remind people because I guess people don't even watch the video sometimes. But again, most of these losers aren't even too much of losers. But again, some of the picks I might disagree with. This is a good example of that, though. For the third biggest loser, I have the Arizona Coyotes. Now, to me, the Coyotes, their draft was complicated for me because on one hand, I love Logan Cooley going third overall. That's the exact pick they needed to make, and I think he's going to be an amazing fit with that team, with that top 6, with players like Nick Schmaltz and players like Clayton Keller. It's gonna fit beautifully, and I think he'll be amazing there. And also, he's going to be going to the NCAA for the next year, so he'll get the patience and the development time that he truly needs. On the other hand, though, Conor Geekie at 11 is too high for me. I have him around the 17 range, 18 range, and I can see where the Coyotes are coming from. Brings great size, but I do have some concerns with the pace. I do have some concerns with the way he uses his physical size, because I don't think he uses it nearly enough. And at number 11, I could see the potential there. He could be the 11th best player in the draft, but there are some big things holding him back, and I'm not sure if the Coyotes have the development staff needed to make that work. As for number 29, you also got Maverick Lamoureux, who you guys know my thoughts on. Still pretty mobile for a defenseman that is 6'7", but I do think his awareness of the ice and his mind there needs some big fixing. At number 29, I could see where they're coming from, but again, I just feel like there was so much more available. The fact that Brad Lambert went right after this pick is exactly what I'm talking about. That type of potential is it's so interesting to have. And with Lamoureux, I think he could be a solid 6 defenseman if it all works out, but there's a lot that needs to happen before it gets there. Then you also got Artem Duda in the second round, 36th overall, which I think is a little bit much for him. I'm not sure how much of that pace and that skill is able to really translate once he gets to the KHL, once he gets to the pros. But we'll see what happens there. At 43, I really like the Julian Lutz pick. That is around where I have him in my rankings, and I think at 43, that's a solid pick to make. Of course, 3 points in the DL this last year in 14 games. Was injured for most of the season, but with what he did play, he showed some really great finesse, good physical size, uses his body. I mean, he's not that big. He's 6'2", but he uses that body so well on the perimeter, around the boards, in transitions, and it's a part of his game quite well, and you combine that with solid skating, and to me, at 43, there's a really interesting project there. At number 62, you got Mikko Mateychuk, who I haven't watched too much of this year, but I've heard some very good things when it comes to that goal scoring, when it comes to that offense. From what I have seen, I've been really impressed. rest, and there could be something there. You also got Jeremy Langlois in the 94 pick. That could also be something, but again, he's another one of those players that doesn't have amazing pace to his game, and once it comes out of the QMJHL, that might be a problem. And number 131 is Matthew Mordin, coming out of the high school league in Ontario. We'll see how that works out. There were also some pretty interesting options there. In the 6th round, they go for another German in Susber, and in the 7th round, they go for Adam Zinka. But overall for the Coyotes, even though I still don't think it's the absolute worst they could have done, I still like the Cooley pick, and I really love the Lutz pick. There were some picks that I think lacked potential and lacked just true potential in the future when it comes to this Coyotes rebuild. To me, if I was the Coyotes, I'd be going potential. They went for a lot more size, and that's fine, but I think they left a lot of talent on the board. Next up, though, let's move on to the second biggest winner of the 2022 NHL draft. While we were going through most of this draft, and especially on the streams, I ended up taking this team as my number 1 winger, or number 1 winner. But at the same time, the more I think about it, the more I have them at number 2, and that is the Winnipeg Jets. To me, when it comes to the Jets, they had an absolutely banging draft this time around, especially their top 4 picks, in my opinion. When it goes to the top 4, I loved almost every single one. Rutger McGrody at 14. I'm one of the biggest fans of him, but apparently I'm not. I had him 16 on my board, and the Jets take him 14. But to me, for McGrody, there's so much to love there, and if you improve that skating just a little bit, he has the offensive tools and the awareness to just play so well with those Jets forwards. I think it's going to go great. As for number 30, you have got one of the best steals, if not the steal of the first round, getting Brad Lambert at number 30. And just like McGrody, I think the Jets are a great situation for Lambert to go to. Just this high-octane offensive team. And to me, Lambert is the best skater of the draft. He has one of the best combos of speed and skill. And to me, if you're able to rein in some of those consistency issues, to me, this is a guy that can pitch in defensively. He has shown to use his speed in key areas, especially on the neutral zone, to get possession back. And to me, if he goes to North America this next season, he's going to start to really develop and get back to the game we know and love of him. And number 30, I love that pick. And number 55, Elias Salomonsson. I like this as well. Pretty stagnant throughout this year. For me, coming into this year, he was a top 10 draftee. Goes 55, and I think that's a pretty good position to get him at. To me, the biggest problem is the decision-making. Kind of reminds me again of Simone Edmondson, but a lesser version of that, where the decision-making and some of the IQ really just holds him back from unlocking his full potential. We see what happened with Simone Edmondson and how much he improved this next year. And I feel like if you're able to unlock that with that size, that speed that he has, and that overall finesse, to me, there's a really solid two-way defenseman there to get. At the 3rd round spot, though, 77th overall, they got Danny Zilkin out of the Guelph Storm. I like this pick as well. Super slippery, super speedy player who does a lot of different things on the ice offensively. There is going to be a lot of years of work put into him, but at the same time, around that maybe 21, 22 age range, I think I could see him making an impact on the Jets roster, and again, being a solid offensive piece. Then also, who puts in quite a bit defensively. Then going on around 4, you get Garrett Brown out of the USHL. Round 6, you got Fabian Wagner, who I think is an interesting selection there, could turn into something. And in the 7th round, you go for a goalie, Dominic DeVincentis out of the OHL. Still have problems pronouncing his name somehow, but they get him in the 7th round, and overall, looking at the selections, especially those first 3 rounds, were amazing. But now we must move on to the second biggest loser of this 2022 draft, and next up, I'm going to go here with the Florida Panthers. Now, kind of the similar situation as some other teams like St. Louis, where I feel like they still had a decent amount of picks, but didn't really use them in the best ways, personally. We look at their picks, and their first pick they had was in the 3rd round, and this is what I'm talking about. The second biggest loser of this draft didn't have a pick until the 3rd round, so I can excuse why they go for some off-the-board picks. But with their first selection, they picked Marek Alsher, who I've seen some of. I'm not sure how much the potential there is, how much skill there is to really unlock, but if he does improve that speed, I could see him being an NHL player. But in the 3rd round, considering some of the options they had available, it was pretty disappointing. In the 4th round, they got Ludwig Janssen, who's been playing the Allsvenskan this year. A little bit less sample size, but at the same time, he's as a defenseman played pretty solidly there, so we'll see how much he's able to improve. You also got Sandis Villamus out of Luleå HF Junior 20, who is playing in, of course, Junior 20 National, 32 points in 40 games in the 5th round. Then you got Joshua Davies, Tyler Muzilik as a goalie. You got Liam Arnsby and Jack Devine, who I think is probably the best pick for the Panthers, 221st overall. That to me is maybe not one of the steals of the draft, but very solid value. But that's like the only pick, in my opinion, that really holds value compared to where the draft pick was at. For the rest, there's some pretty big reaches, but again, they're not a huge loser, but they're still second on this list, which just shows how little losers they really were in this draft. Now, because I want to end this video on with a high note, let's go through 2 straight losers here, going from the Panthers to the biggest loser of the draft. And I'm sad to say this because I do like one of these picks, but at the same time, I think the biggest loser of this draft was the San Jose Sharks. Now, if you remember, they had the 11th overall pick and a good opportunity to get a lot done. But in my opinion, with trading down in that 27th pick and getting an extra second as well, to me, there was some missed potential with the picks they actually ended up going for. Now, here's the thing. Just saying it out loud, Mattias Hävelid at 45, very solid pick. A lot of potential, needs a lot more physicality to him, but his puck moving ability is fantastic. Michael Fisher is kind of the same way, but he's playing in the USHL this year. It's hard to really see him projecting right now, but still has a great passing game and really thinks the offensive level quite well. Besides that, I'm really not sure if the Sharks, what they were doing this year specifically, because in the past couple of years, they've gone really hard into potential, into sky-high skill, and this year, it was a lot less of that. At 27th overall, they went for Philip Bystedt, who wasn't in my top 50. I still see him becoming a very interesting player, and probably a great fourth line, maybe okay third line centerman, but this is a guy that I just don't know how much true skill there is. Maybe that passing does take an even bigger step. That might be a bigger part of his offense, but I do like the two-way game there. I love how he uses his physicality, but I'm just not sure how much talent there is there. It kind of reminds me of John Beecher and what we saw with the Bruins a couple years ago as that late first rounder, low ceiling centerman that goes pretty high. To me, with Bystedt, there was much better available options. And number 34, Cameron Lund, who I'm pretty high compared to most, but I have him 44th in my rankings, and he goes 34. Still a little bit of a reach for me, but another centerman who, in my opinion, has a pretty high floor, lower ceiling, but I do like his quickness, his vision, and his decision making. There's a pretty smart player there, but at the same time, kind of like Bystedt, I'm not sure if there's elite skill to be had. Of course, with Hävelid and Fisher, I like those 2 picks, but then you got Bupit as a goalie in the 4th round, you got Furlong as a defenseman in the 5th round, which is kind of just okay to me, and the rest of the draft is just rather meh. Besides Hävelid and Fisher, I think the rest was kind of a little bit of wasted potential, unfortunately. But now let's move on to the biggest winner of the 2022 NHL draft. And the thing was, looking at everything, looking at how they drafted in this year, to me personally, looking at how it went, there was no other place, no other team that I could select for the biggest winner than the Seattle Kraken. This was the type of draft that they needed to have. With the prospect pool, obviously last year they added some big guns like Matty Beniers, but besides that, I didn't really think their draft was amazing. Ryan Winterton was an interesting pick, and he's progressed well, but they needed to add a lot of depth, and I think they did in spades. Obviously, you get Shane Wright at 4th overall, and here's the thing. I know a lot of people are turning on Wright now since he went 4th overall. I still have him 1st. I'm not going to change my draft ranking because he went lower than expected. I'm going to change my draft ranking if he shows me that he deserves to on the ice and with his production. Until that happens, I still think he's the best prospect in this draft, and they get him at 4th overall, and you combine the situation. To me, Wright is going to be perfect in Seattle, and that's the exact type of franchise I want him to go to, a franchise that can really build his two-way game and be able to get the most out of that shot as well, and you combine the fact that you already got Matty Beniers there, and that's a 1-2 center punch that can win a lot of hockey games in the future. At number 34, they went for another fantastic center pick here in Jagger Firkus. I absolutely love this selection, 35th overall. I had him 18th in my draft rankings, and to me, Firkus is one of the best shots, one of the best high-octane paces in the entire draft. Loves to create offense, loves to just be a busy bee in the offensive zone. There is the big problem of his physicality, how he gets knocked off pucks way too easily, and that'll be something to develop. But at number 35, the offense is at such a high level potentially that, to me, he could be a top 6 forward if it all pans out. And at number 35, that's a good pick to make. Now, for another forward, they got Yanni Nyman at the 49th spot. This is another interesting one to me. He's kind of a player that I haven't really seen too much of, but I do like the overall offensive tools there and how he's able to use them to get passing lanes through, be able to get space around him. As a potential two-way dual threat guy, I could see it working out. Maybe not the spot I would have taken him, but still, I think maybe around that range is just fine for him. Now, this was, in my opinion, the worst pick at number 58 for the Kraken in Nicholas Kakko. To me, it was a really, really humongous reach. Like, why would you pick Kakko 58 and pick Goyette 61? Could you not have gotten Kakko 61st? I mean, he was ranked 8th in terms of European goalies in NHL Central Scouting, so I'm not sure what was going on there, but I haven't watched Kakko that much. I can't really say too much about him, so we'll see how that works out. As for number 61, they got David Goyette, who I think was a pretty stellar pick, right where I think he should have gone. High skill, high pace to his game, and solid skating as well. The physicality, just like Fergus, is a big block, and I feel like with Fergus, with Goyette, it's more of a problem than it is with Fergus, at least in making that next level. But I do think when it comes to Goyette, if you can round out some of that ability, I think you could have a decent centerman there if it all works out. Then going on to the third round, you got Ty Nelson, 68th overall. And to me with Ty Nelson, even though I think this is the range he probably should have gone, at the same time, if you're able to unlock the most out of Ty Nelson, this is an amazing pick to make. To me, the biggest problem is his decision making and the way he plays the game right now, but the skill is undeniable. He can be great at skating. He can be great with his edge work. He can be great with his passing, and the vision can also be at such a high level. The problem is the inconsistencies. There's so many times where you'll watch a game of Nelson and come away scared of even drafting him in the first place, but others he'll show you exactly what he's made of. So we'll see what happens in 68, but that is another pick that I think is interesting. As for number 91, Ben McDonald, not much to say about this. Haven't watched him too much, but at number 91, I think it definitely is a reach. Now, Tyson Jugnuff, I think, is an interesting one. Played in the BCHL this last year, was around a point per game. We'll see how that works. Then you got also Tucker Robertson, who's an overager in the OHL with Peterborough, 81 points in 68 games. I think he was worth a draft pick. Fourth round is still a bit high to me, but still, in the end, considering what the Seattle Kraken got in this draft, what they were able to achieve, getting a top 6 centerman, getting another potential top 6 player, getting a guy like David Goyette, getting a potential top 4 offensive D and Ty Nelson if everything turns out right. They really did go for high potential over anything else, and that's usually how I like to draft. Considering what happens now, I think the Seattle Kraken are now fit for a much better future with this draft, setting themselves up for a long time, and to me, they are the biggest winner of the 2022 NHL draft. But that'll be it for today, guys. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. If you didn't enjoy, hit that like button, subscribe, hit that notification bell. Let me know in the comments down below what you agree and disagree with, and let me know who your biggest winners and losers are for this NHL draft. Let me know your thoughts down below. And again, for everybody that hasn't known already, for the losers on this list, they aren't really that big of losers, especially like even the San Jose Sharks. I like a couple of picks there. So overall, pretty balanced, pretty open, and pretty wide draft. And we'll see how it turns out in a few years' time. It's going to be a really interesting one to look back on. But thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.